Nova Scotia's Bay of Fundy coastline. A journey through time on one of the world's most famous waterways. From the tip of remote Digby Neck to the never-ending mudflats of Cobequid Bay. The coastlines here have it all. Incredible ancient rock formations rising from the deep.
At that time, all the continents were together in the supercontinent called Pangaea, and we were right at the center of that splitting.
The tragic story of the Acadian culture, nearly wiped out centuries ago.
And they would be deported from this land, that their goods were being confiscated, and they were prisoners.
And the Bay of Fundy's signature trait, the highest tides in the world.
There's more water flowing in and out of the Bay of Fundy on each tide, in excess of 100 billion cubic meters, than flows out of the mouths of every single river in the world combined.
Now, we explore this rugged coastline like never before. A bird's-eye view, unlocking the secrets of our maritime past, present, and future. This is Canada Over the Edge. High above the remote western coastline of Nova Scotia, white-capped swells greet us on approach to the world-famous Bay of Fundy coast. In the distance, the villages of Comoville, Saulniéville, and Pointe-d'Église mark the beginning of a journey along Nova Scotia's Acadian shore. These villages in the heart of Acadie were land grants from the King of France to settlers in the 18th century. Today, more than 65% of residents still claim French as their mother tongue. Église Sainte-Marie, the tallest wooden structure in North America. And Université Sainte-Anne, far below, stand as religious and cultural symbols for the French population that has thrived here for more than 4 centuries. heading northwest, barely skimming the surface. These spectacular gravel beaches are a trademark of this region. On the horizon sits this coastline's other holy shrine. This one carved from solid rock. Église Saint-Bernard began construction a century ago by local residents moving load after load of granite by train and ox cart. Over the next 30 years, they would complete this architectural masterpiece, solidifying a French Roman Catholic presence along the Bay of Fundy. Offshore, this narrow strip of land, Long Island, is the northwest maritime boundary of the province. Here, jagged cliff faces stretch for miles. Part of Nova Scotia's North Mountain chain, formed in a catastrophic volcanic eruption millions of years ago.
What's really unique about Nova Scotia is that we're part of a big rift system that opened up about 200 million years ago. And what a rift system is when the two plates on the Earth separate and you form a new ocean. At that time, all the continents were together in the supercontinent called Pangaea. And we were right at the center of that splitting. And during that splitting apart, magma rose to the surface and formed this massive volcanic province. And that's what the North Mountain is part of. We can see it down in New York City, the Palisades in New York City. It's in South America, it's in Morocco. The same basalt that we see here is in all those places.
Now, millions of years later, the coastline draws visitors from around the world. Many come to the Long Island coast to see one of this region's great stone marvels, the Balancing Rock.
Well, Nova Scotia is very unique geologically. We're on the edge of many things, and that's through geological time. Well, the Balancing Rock, it's one of the more unique features, if not the most unique feature in Nova Scotia, mainly because it attracts every kind of person to it. It's a piece of basalt, columnar basalt, that's balanced almost impossibly on a basalt flow underneath. And so when one looks at it, one immediately questions, why is it there? Why is it still balancing? Could I tip it over? And it's a rather complex set of events that probably led to its being formed. Columns of basalt, as they get eroded, tend to topple over, and yet it stands tall and in a very sort of unusual angle too.
Continuing northeast, Nova Scotia's Long Island stretches 15 kilometers out to sea. Part of two massive lava flows that form the Annapolis Valley's North Mountain chain, beginning on land, extending into the sea. At the village of Tiverton, Long Island meets Digby Neck, a narrow 20-kilometer-long peninsula. Here, a small ferry connects the 2 points of land over a waterway known as Petit Passage. Above the village sits the iconic Boar's Head Lighthouse. A light has shone here since 1863, marking a crucial passage for ships seeking shelter from the rough waters of the Bay of Fundy. Beyond Digby Neck and back on shore, this is the town after which the neck is named. Digby and its famous fishing fleet sit just inland, on a body of water known as the Annapolis Basin. This is the base of operations for a scallop fishery that is known from the United States to Hong Kong, an industry worth more than $100 million a year. Inland, beyond the village of Bear River and the former Canadian military base at Cornwallis, stands a monument to one of the earliest European settlements in North America. Samuel de Champlain and Pierre de Monts named this area Port Royal in 1605, declaring the region and its beauty fit for the King of France. And the waterway suitable for hundreds of his ships of war. Now along the northern shore of the Annapolis Basin, a replica of the earliest fortification here still stands. The habitation was a meeting place for French settlers who had spent a disastrous winter on the unsheltered island of St. Croix the previous year. In the shelter of the North Mountains, the French would prosper, aided by their native Mi'kmaq neighbors. In the following decades, the culture known as Acadie would be born. All along this coastline, symbols of the early Acadian settlers are everywhere. During the 18th century, Acadian families would build an incredible dike system, lining more than 5,000 hectares of coastline with logs, sticks, and mud, keeping salt water out and allowing fresh water to irrigate the land. Today, these lands continue to be some of the province's most fertile. An Acadian legacy, harnessing the power of the sea. Nearby, one of the most scenic towns in Nova Scotia. When the English conquered Acadia in 1710, Port Royal became known as Annapolis Royal, and it would serve as the capital of Nova Scotia until the founding of Halifax decades later. It would be attacked again unsuccessfully by the French. In total, Annapolis Royal would be attacked 13 times, more than any other site in North America. Now, this aerial journey continues along one of the world's most famous waterways, exploring the storm surges and crashing waves that have shaped this coastline over millions of years. In the distance, a port in the storm, the tiny hamlet of Port George. Named after England's King George III, Port George sits directly on the 45th parallel, halfway between the North Pole and the equator. The village is home to generations of seafarers on a bay with a history dating back to the 16th century, when Fundy first appeared on the maps of European fishermen who braved these waters. Continuing northeast, the contours of the coast lead higher and higher into fabulous steep cliff faces. These cliffs stretch for miles, an abrupt end to this mountain chain, lining the northern limit of the Annapolis Valley. With limited access from land and sea, it's a rare glimpse at one of Nova Scotia's natural wonders. Finally, through the trees, a church steeple marks a return to civilization. Home to just over 200 people, the village of Margarettsville holds a place in maritime history as the site where Joshua Slocum's famous boat Spray was built. A boat that would carry him on history's first solo circumnavigation of the world's oceans. Heading inland at the picturesque village of Halls Harbor, the rustic wharf and colorful buildings lead to the peak of the North Mountain chain and the steep valley below. More than 1,000 farms dot the landscape. Fertile lands fed by the rushing tidal waters and winding rivers and streams. a major source of food for all Nova Scotians. Next, the Bay of Fundy at low tide. This long trail of red, muddy shoreline has become an iconic image of this coast. Drawing visitors from around the world. At Burncoat Head, a replica lighthouse looks out to the Minas Basin. Constructed in the 1990s, it replaces the original, which stood for nearly a century, eventually lost to tidal erosion, here among the highest tides in the world. Finally, 7 kilometers offshore, and more than 100 kilometers from its point of origin in Digby Neck, the other extremity of Nova Scotia's North Mountain chain comes into view. This is Cape Split. A mountain of ancient lava flows rising majestically from the sea. Historians believe the word Fundy comes from the French fonder, to split. Here on the bay, it's a perfect description. With cliffs more than 200 feet tall, old forest, rare plant species, and some of the best hiking trails in the region. Cape Split has become a pilgrimage for many Nova Scotians. Cape Split divides the waters of the Bay of Fundy from the Minas Basin, creating vicious tidal currents that surround this wandering trajectory of land. From Digby Neck to Cape Split, the North Mountain chain is one of the East Coast's most impressive coastal ranges. With the province of New Brunswick sitting on the horizon. This is Nova Scotia's northern shore. Remote, and some say forgotten, this stretch of coastline holds some of Fundy's most remarkable landscapes. This is Cape Dore, a landmark set of sea cliffs along the Bay of Fundy coast. Like Cape Split, Cape Dore divides the main branch of the Bay of Fundy from the Minas Basin. Surrounding currents are treacherous, making the iconic lighthouse here more than just a tourist attraction. Since 1875, a whistle has warned approaching vessels of navigational hazards. A light was added in 1922. With cliffs hundreds of feet above sea level, Cape Dore is one of the most popular hiking trails in the region for those not afraid of heights. Heading east, the shoreline continues to the town of Parsboro. Once a shipbuilding hub during the age of sail, today the town relies on tourism for survival. Geological museums here showcase the incredible fossil finds in the region, with the cliffs and tidal flats surrounding Parsboro being among the most lucrative fossil beds in the world. Offshore, small fishing fleets out of Parsboro and Advocate Harbor continue to patrol these waters. At low tide, fishing boats here simply rest on dry land, waiting for the waters to rise. Further offshore, a rare opportunity to explore exposed seafloor. For 12 hours a day, the surface of the Bay of Fundy is seemingly of another world. Millions of years ago, this was the center of the supercontinent known as Pangaea. As Pangaea separated, rift valleys were formed, creating oceans and bays like here at Fundy. In more recent history, mastodon and caribou herds roamed these lands during the last ice age. As glaciers melted some 10,000 years ago, ocean levels rose and the world's highest tides were born. With tides as high as 17 meters, water rushing in and out of the bay creates a powerful force. Some believe this power will be our future.
The Bay of Fundy itself has 160 billion tons of water flowing every tide. That's 4 times more than the combined flow of all the freshwater rivers in the world. All that water comes up through the Minas Passage and pinches, just like, holding your thumb on a garden hose, pinches through the Minas Passage and speeds up to 5 or over 5 meters a second. And because of that water speed, you get a tremendous amount of power. And that's why we're here. The Bay of Fundy has up to 60,000 megawatts of power, and in the Minas Passage, 8,000 megawatts of power. And by comparison, the most amount of energy we use in Nova Scotia is just a little over 2,000 megawatts. So in the Minas Passage alone, you're looking at about 4 times the total electrical demand of the whole province.
Matt Lumley believes if we can harness even a fraction of that force, Nova Scotia will be a world leader in renewable energy.
The kind of technology that we're looking at now that's sort of really recently emerging is called in-stream tidal. In-stream tidal is a little bit like an underwater windmill where the turbine is placed directly in the flow of the current to capture the energy. Last year, we played host to North America's first commercial scale tidal turbine. That went in 2009, was removed December of 2010. Next year, you're going to see 4 different technologies deployed at the Force site. What we're looking at in terms of in-stream technology, most recent models suggest we have about 2,500 megawatts, so roughly the entire demand of the province. Another way of looking at that is 2,500 megawatts is about equivalent to the power for 1 million homes.
It's incredible hope for the future. And it's not just fantasy. Miles away, it's already happening on a smaller scale. Here, the Annapolis Tidal Power Station operates silently, channeling the ebb and flow of the world's highest tides into electric power.
At high tide, the Bay of Fundy looks like any other body of water in the world. Interesting coastline, a bit of an erosion problem here and there, but what really sets the Bay of Fundy apart is low tide. At low tide, depending upon where you are, you will either see vertical elevations of 30 to 40 feet, 55 feet in some places, or you will see acres of mudflats in the upper part of the bay. When this was built, there were only two other tidal power plants in the world, both in Europe. One in France at Laurens that was built in 1964, and one in northern Russia at a place called Kislyak-Guba, built in 1974. Since this plant has been built, there's been only one other constructed, and that's on the west coast of Korea. At the Annapolis Causeway, we let the water in for free, and we make it work to get back out through our turbine.
Six meters below ground, a massive turbine system transforms tidal forces into power.
Since 1984, what we've done here is we've allowed the tide to come into the head pond of the Annapolis River, raising the water level in the Annapolis River by approximately ½ a meter. And then as the tide recedes on the ocean side, we will just wait until the tide drops approximately 2 meters below the head pond level. At that point, the computer over here, which controls the plant, will sense the pressure difference. It will open the gates down here using a hydraulic motor. When we first start generating with about a 2 meter or 6 foot head, we're producing only about 1 megawatt of power. That's enough for, say, Annapolis Royal and Granville Ferry. However, as the tide continues to drop on that side, the head pond level stays about the same. With the ocean dropping away, that increases our head, which increases the potential energy of the water going through the tunnel, which increases our power output. So by the time we've reached low tide, we can be making as much as 20,000 kilowatts of energy, or 20 megawatts, enough for about 4,500 homes.
With more than 500 kilometers of spectacular shoreline, spanning 2 countries and 2 Canadian provinces, the Bay of Fundy is one of the world's maritime wonders. Now, along Nova Scotia's northern shore, hidden gems are revealed along this remote stretch of coast. Five islands. From a distance, it is ethereal. Literally 5 islands in a near straight line leading to shore. It is a geological wonder with an incredible history in both science and legend. The island names, Moose, Diamond, Long, Egg, and Pinnacle, come from the Mi'kmaq deity Glooskap and the mountains of sod he launched at his archenemy, the beaver, for mocking his powers. science tells an equally fascinating tale. During the Ice Age, the village of Five Islands was a delta, surrounded by mighty rivers and streams, flowing from an incredible glacier in the hills nearby. For thousands of years, the weight of the glacier forced the land down, and the region was underwater. As the Ice Age ended and the glacier melted, the land rose again, some 15 meters, leaving behind this set of geological wonders. Today, Five Islands stands as a shrine of nature, immortalizing a turbulent geological past, set against the highest tides in the world that continue to shape these coastlines. Across the bay, the fertile farmland of the Annapolis Valley stretches for miles far below. Nearby, the town of Wolfville. It was established in the early 19th century as a shipbuilding hub and an exporter of its world-famous apples from nearby orchards. Today, the town is home to Acadia University, one of Canada's most prominent schools. Named after the region's first French settlers from the 17th century. And it was in nearby Grand Pré that the story of the Acadians would be brought to the world. On September 5, 1755, British forces gathered residents inside the local church and read a proclamation announcing the expulsion of the Acadians from their homeland. Now, more than 250 years later, their descendants return to mark this anniversary.
It's not really as sorrowful and sad. We don't see any English soldiers here, or I should say New England soldiers, rounding up the Acadians. But actually on September the 5th in 1755 was the day that the Acadian men from the area were called to a meeting in the church of Saint-Charles-les-Mines. And that's where Lieutenant Colonel Winslow read to them the order of deportation that told them they would be deported from this land, that their goods were being confiscated, and they were prisoners. We've invited 418 people to come and be part of this activity. It's a way of learning, sort of an educational activity as well as historical. We've given them the names of the men and the villages that they came from on a little tag, and they're going to wear that so they can be that person for that time.
255 ans que les hommes et les garçons de la grande région de Grand Pré étaient faits prisonniers par les Britanniques dans l'église Saint-Charles-des-Mines. C'est à ce moment qu'ils ont appris que leurs terres et leurs biens étaient confisqués et qu'ils allaient être déportés.
With the proclamation read, the ceremony continues as the reenactors march to the coastline and the site where the Acadians would finally be expelled.
Like most Acadians, I have a connection to Grand Pré, and sometimes it's not obvious, but part of this reenactment is a walk and a walk of commemoration where there will be people giving basically life stories of some of the people who lived here. And it's special for me because I get to be Anne LeBlanc. And she's my great-great-great-great-grandmother who really was deported from this area.
An iron cross marks the end of this somber journey, a unique commemoration of this historic event. For archaeologist Jonathan Fowler, today's reenactment holds another purpose. Using the footprint created by today's gathering, he will continue his search for the ruins of the original St. Charles de Mines Church.
We do know that this is part of the old Acadian landscape or village that was here. In fact, there were probably several small villages along Wolfville Ridge here right behind you. Toward the center of this cluster of settlements was a church and a priest's house and the cemetery. We know this from historical records and some not very high-quality maps. So we know there was a church here. We know it was here. It was constructed in the 1680s. We know it was here in 1755 when the deportation took place here. We know that the men and boys of the various communities here were held in that church. But nobody can put their hands on the ruins of that building. And actually that's very important because this site is here to commemorate that experience. And wouldn't it be that much more powerful an experience for visitors if we could actually put our hands on that place? So what we did today was we invited 418 members of the public, each representing one of the people we know who came to the church in 1755 to be taken prisoner. And by putting the people together, we have a sense of how big a building that must have been, at least as big as the group of people we saw here today. And so, that's just a new piece of evidence that we can use.
Now heading southeast beyond Wolfville and Grand Pré, the inner waterways of the Bay of Fundy lie far below. Here, geological formations continue to appear out of nowhere. They are the trademark of this coastline, known throughout the world. The Bay of Fundy marks the beginnings of European culture in North America and is at the heart of our geological world. With its rushing waters and powerful tides, it is also the future, here on the edge of Canada.